Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Don't Screw Up Your Kids podcast. I am your host, Kaleesha Washington, your parenting BFF. I help parents plan with purpose so that we can raise kids who are happy, healthy, and whole. I'm super excited that our guest today is Dr. Tawana L. Wiggins. Let me tell you just a little bit about her. As I bring it to the front, she's a parent, she's an educator, she's a systems strategist who helps parents, leaders, and others build the internal and external conditions that create spaces that people don't quit from. Her work is grounded in transforming mindsets, leveraging love in leadership, and championing conflict so individuals and environments become steady, sustainable, and connected. Welcome to the Don't Screw Up Your Kids podcast. Super excited to have you today.
Thank you, Kaleesha. I'm super excited to be here. The title alone is enough. Like, don't screw up your kids. Like, come on, let's get into it. I'm so excited about our conversation.
Yes. So you're a parent also, right?
Yes. I
Yeah.
have three children, and the ages span from. So pray for me. My oldest is 29. She'll be 30 next year. My middle child is 26. He'll be 27 next year, and my youngest just turned 11 2 weeks ago. And I have two grandchildren, 4 and 2. So.
Nice. Listen, there's nothing like grandparenting. I'm like, who knew that grandparenting was so much better than parenting?
Right.
Boy, of course, you get to send them home. But
At that
also,
point.
the way I see it, I'm like, I've already made the mistakes with my own children. I've learned to be a little bit better with the grandkids, you
Yeah.
know. How did you get into education and in educational leadership?
Yeah. Before I jump in that, I want to make a point or to what you just said, like as far as your grandkids. I actually enjoy the fact that, well, now enjoy that my kids are so spread apart because I have grown-ups and then I have one that I'm still raising. And so I
Mhm.
get the opportunity with the one that's youngest to make some corrections of the things that I didn't do or didn't do well with the oldest. But then I also have them as my partners. Like they can help me and speak to those things and say things like, yeah, mom, when you did that, like, those types of things. So I absolutely love that. And then you have the grandkids that you obviously can help nurture your own children and raising them as well. But how did I get into education? It was all by accident, if you will. Like it was something that I was doing in corporate, but I didn't call it education. Like I did a lot of training and teaching when I was in corporate. And then when I moved to the South, I figured I would just substitute while I'm getting my degree in business while my kids are in school. And it turned out I was great at it. And that's not to toot my own horn, but I was phenomenal at it. I loved it. It came with ease. So I quickly switched my major from business to education and then just continued. And from there, I just progressed from being, and even in New York, I was school counseling, but that was just to get my degree, finish my degree in psychology. And then it just progressed. I went into being assistant principal, curriculum instructor and writer, developer, and then principal, and then COO. And so it just kind of just fell in my lap and just happened. There were nothing that I actually applied for or tried to get. It just happened and it flowed so naturally. And I just am a strong believer that, when you're doing what you love, you never work a day in your life. And I actually was called to be an educator, and I was excited to even realize that in my life. So.
I love that. I love that so much. And I was going to ask you, where were you from when you said you moved to the South? So, New York, is that where you're originally from?
Yes,
Oh,
Buffalo,
yeah.
New York, go Bills. So yeah.
It's a different energy, New York
It
to the
is.
South. Yeah. But that's so good. And I love that you said, education, you fell into it as a passion, didn't know. Um, but still having been in education on multiple levels, from substitute teacher to leader, I know you've seen a lot with parents on the spectrum, good and bad.
Yeah,
And I know your specialty is on making sure people don't quit.
yeah,
And they say that people don't quit their jobs, they quit their bosses. As parents, you don't have that option to,
mhm,
like, most people don't take the option. You do, you can always put your kids in foster care. Most people don't take that. But what about that mental quit?
yeah.
They give up trying. How do we help parents not quit on things like trying to change behavior or build relationships where those relationships might not have been in place already?
Yeah, that's good stuff because when you say like quit, a lot of times people just think like walking out and leaving and being done. I focus also on the quiet quitting because that happens. Quitting looks like you don't even care anymore, or you care, but you're not caring in a way that's producing sustainability, that's producing longevity, that's producing legacy. The goal when I'm talking to parents, when I'm thinking about quitting, is to raise children who want to come home when they no longer have to. And so, like for instance, my 11-year-old, when she gets off the bus, she has nowhere to go but to my house. But my 26 and my 29-year-old, they can decide to drive right past my house if they choose to. My daughter lives in Atlanta, but coming back home, building that type of relationship that they come home when they don't have to. And so when we think about what that looks like as far as building those types of environments, we start with the internal environment, not just the external. We start with what are we doing for ourselves? How are we building ourselves on the inside so that we are walking in empathy, that we are leveraging love in our leadership as parents? And what that looks like is being able to see underneath the behavior. I always like to say, even like when I was in education and I would train my staff, that nobody really gets up in the morning and say, today I'm about to make everybody's life a living you know what. Like that just doesn't happen. But if it does happen, then there's something else behind that. So we have to talk about that. So when I was assistant principal, my a major bucket of my job was culture and behavior. And so I would always tell my staff that your job is to enforce the rules, my job is to investigate the behavior. And so there's always an underlying reason. And so for parents, it's the same thing. Is if your child is behaving a certain way, then stopping for a moment and looking at the patterns, looking at the environment that's speaking to that behavior. I just did a talk yesterday with the behavior scientists who talked about some of these things with regards if your child is constantly, now they have to go to the bathroom every time at dinner time or at homework time. We don't then conclude that they probably have a bladder infection. We conclude that, wait a minute, what's happening right now that's causing them to want to quit, to check out,
Mhm.
those types of things. Because again, our kids are taught to be defiant, if you will. They don't just say, today I'm not doing. And that defiancy is oftentimes not a refusal or buck against the system. It is, there is something else going on that is causing them to show up like this. And so for parents, it is being able to really investigate the behavior and taking time. And then the biggest thing with that is I'm a strong believer that if you were given something, then you were given something for that something. So as your children, if your children are struggling or have some challenges, then there's something within you that is developing to help speak to that challenge because that child is yours. And even to parents who have adopted or fostered kids, then that's where you have to do a stronger, in-depth internalizing work so that you can see what is it that I need to be able to offer this child. And I think that that's important too, to even investigate, like, are you really equipped to do this, thing. So,
Wow, that was amazing. Now I'm gonna pause this because I'm seeing that I'm not connected to my Ethernet, even though it's plugged in, and I just don't want to make sure. I want to make sure that we don't have. Okay, perfect. You can hear me again.
yep.
Okay, good. So one thing that you mentioned, you said leadership as parents. And that just that phrase, you said it, we don't looking at our leadership as parents, and I just jotted that down because I've never thought about it in terms of that as parents, we are leaders and we think about leadership and we do certain things as leaders on our jobs, but we don't think
Hmm.
about usually using those same practices when it comes to leadership as parents. And but there is the overlap, you know one of the things that I know as a challenge for me with professionally and personally. So as a parent, I went to work soon as my daughter was born. She was maybe 2 weeks old when I went back to work, right? And they talk about how important it is to bond with your kids when they're
Hmm.
first born, and I didn't get to do that. But it took work to reestablish that when she was like 5 years old, and we had a lot of one-on-one time because she was in kindergarten half day and my son was in full day first grade. So we spent a lot of time together at that time. Um, but it's a process. And that don't quit philosophy on building that relationship is going to take time. It took
Hmm.
time for it to not be established on the front end. Like, what can we say to parents who may be trying to rebuild a relationship with their kids? And it is challenging, and the kids are showing behaviors because as you say, all behavior is communicating something. And when it's communicating that there's a problem in the
Hmm.
relationship, what can parents do to not give up and to not quit on rebuilding that relationship?
Yeah, want to just touch on what we said about parenting being leadership. I've noticed that across the board that a lot of people don't see that. I do some coaching, and we were asking about some leadership questions, and they were like, "I don't really see myself as a leader," and I'm like, "You have two children." Like that, I was thinking that was your obvious answer, but it's obvious to me being on the both sides of the coin, being a leader in
Mhm,
organizations and then also in my home. And so it's one thing I have to build individuals to know that as a parent you're a leader. So that's why even my language in any of my productions for social, I always have to say parents and leaders because parents don't see themselves as leaders. And
mhm,
so with that being said, being able to shift your mindset and understanding that your home is an organization. You should have a mission statement, you should have a vision, you should have some
right.
clear, defined core values within your home, and that you're building an organization and the product is relationship. That's your outcome is the strong relationship because it is a legacy that is happening there. What happens, whatever you do in that home when you are long and gone, that should be lived on. Someone asked me, I think my child asked me, what's the legacy that I want to leave? And I'm like, I can't say, I can say anything. I can say, I want to leave this, I want to leave that. But if it's not modeled, then the legacy that's left is what you speak about after I'm gone, but what's built in
Mhm,
that relationship, that's the product. And so when we talk about what can parents do on in being proactive after the fact, if you hadn't had the opportunity to be proactive and you're hearing this and you're like, oh, I need to make some shifts and I need to make some change, the number one thing, well, not even the number one, a couple of things to understand is conflict is inevitable, but a conversation is key. Like we go through life every day in conflict, and sometimes people are like, well, no, we shouldn't have conflict. Well, if you think about it this way, when you're driving down the street and you're making a decision on what direction to go or where to eat, that's a conflict. And you don't
mhm,
lose your cool and crash out because you can't figure out if you're going to drive right or left, or if you're going to choose Chick-fil-A over, Chipotle. You to make a decision. And that's the same thing in your organization as your family is there's going to be conflict because you're dealing with people. And no matter what, people are have their own experiences. So when we think about our children, sometimes as parents, we get caught up in thinking that they're our prototype and they're ours. And so we think that their only experience they've ever had is us. And so we start talking to them as if they have no other experience. And we have to
mhm.
remember that they've experienced other things in their quiet time with their friends in school and all of those things. So being able to be comfortable to understand that there will be conflict, and then just a conversation. And just like you would do with your friends or significant other, if you're having a moment and you need time to regulate, you ask for a moment, you ask to walk away, and you have to model that for children, whether grown or young, that you're human. And so if you're walking away to say, hey, I need a moment, I cannot deal with this right now, that gives them the okay and the modeling of when I'm having a moment, I can't just press through. I may need to say, I can walk away. And making that okay for your children to say, I can't do this right now. Not forcing them
Mhm.
like, I need you to talk, we will talk right now. But then the other thing is being understanding that some things have to break to build. I was talking on someone else's podcast, and they asked a question like that with regards to what's the most uncomfortable thing is you got to break, you got to be willing to break some things because you've been doing it and it's been working, quote unquote, and
Mhm.
basically you're just duct taping a thing. And so being able to unduct tape it, take it back apart, knowing that this is not going to be comfortable, it ain't going to feel good because I've been moving along, but it takes work. And so some people will shy away from that because they're like, well, I don't want to do all that work. Well, keep on driving that car with duct tape and eventually it's going to break down. It'll get you so far. And so just thinking about it, that if you want a quick fix, something that's going to last you just until your kid gets out the house, or if you want something long term where you're going to be able to be a part of your grandchildren's life, where you're going to be a part
Mhm.
of your family, where your kids are going to have that relationship, you have to think about what is it that you want there. If you just are looking for, like, I'm just trying to get these kids out the house, then go ahead and duct tape it. But if not, we got to take that duct tape off and start to rebuild something.
You know, you really touched on something because I was watching Oprah has a new podcast now, and she was talking
Yes.
about people who are that they're, what are they calling it? They are like somehow quitting their parents, but they are like
Yeah.
just, oh, they're going, they call it, I forgot what they called it. It's a phrase that they're using for it now, but they're going no contact is what it is. They're going no contact with their parents. And you have adults who now, the children are now adults. They have kids, and they're like, we don't have any intention on our kids even meeting our parents. And I was like, wow, but that shows something wrong in the relationship when they were younger that didn't get fixed. And now as adults,
Hmm.
they don't have a desire to fix that relationship. One thing that you had talked about, is you talk about is the difference between reacting and responding.
Hmm.
Can you share what's the difference between reacting and responding?
Yeah, I think reacting, I feel, is when when your ego's intact. Like you're just like, I need to get my point across. My ego has been bruised, or I've been slighted, or I'm on offense. So I've been offended. So now I'm on defense. And so you don't give yourself time to reflect and listen and have empathy. And so the moment someone says something, you're immediately taking a hit and responding, and that's a reaction. If you are, I'm not responding, but you're immediately reacting. But if you're taking a moment, and that's why you have the active listening, like I hear what you're saying. Give me a moment. When I was doing my studies, I remember my professor would always say, after asking a question, give yourself 20 seconds. Do not immediately. You may have an answer because, and it's funny too, because for men, information, especially traumatizing or hurtful or something, information that is kind of hitting on the emotional side, it travels from the frontal cortex all the way to the back this way. For women, it goes side to
Mhm.
side, and so immediately we want to be like, I got a response. But we have to train ourselves to say, let me let it travel a little bit more. I used to tell my students, just because it enters your brain, don't let it eject out your mouth, let it dance. And so whenever they would raise their hand, I'm like, did that do the 1-2 step in your brain yet? Because if it just was about to fall out your mouth, we need to make sure it goes ahead and do a Y2C in your brain for a second. And so that's the difference when you take time for that information to process and hit all those synapses in your brain to kind of rationalize and reason some of the things, especially when it's emotional thing. Because when you've gotten information that feels offensive, then your cortisol levels shoot up and you're immediately trying to save yourself. Your brain is designed to save you, but your brain is
Yeah.
also a muscle. So you train it to decide what needs saving and what doesn't. So when you give yourself time to process and think, what you're doing is telling your brain, we're safe, we're
Mhm.
okay. And so the next time something like that happens, your brain is not so quick to react, but it is quick to say, hold on, let's think about this first before we develop a response. And sometimes that response is, I'm going to need a moment to sit with that.
Mhm. I love that. Even, and when you talk about taking that moment, sometimes we say things we can't take that back. When you say anything that you say, you can't take back. And whether or not a person
Hmm.
can forgive what you've said, sometimes it's so damaging that it takes a while to even forgive. And so, like, it's so important to
Absolutely.
take that moment to think about what you're about to say. Um, just a
Hmm.
short story. I remember the only time I've ever called my daughter stupid. She was in 12th grade. She had allowed somebody to cash a bad check on her bank account that was
Oh,
tied to my
Lordy.
bank account. Boy. And I have a friend who had already done time in prison for that very thing, and she knew
Oh,
it.
my.
And so I'm like, you let him do what? And I said, how could you be so stupid? She immediately started crying. And she's like, if my own mom thinks I'm stupid, I must really be stupid. Then I started crying and I apologized. And I said, you're not stupid. What you did was stupid. Like, we don't ever do that again. But you are not stupid. And I didn't want her internalizing that. And I've never done that again. She's 30 years old now. But at 17, when she did that, and you can never take those words back. I don't know if she
Right.
even remembers that interaction, but there's some things that I know that are stuck in my brain. I hope that's not one of the things that's stuck in her brain. But it just taking, now I do take that moment before I respond to something. because I know that if I say something, it can be very damaging to the relationship.
Yeah.
Um, one thing I know that you've addressed before is the importance of sharing the why and being okay with people asking why. And I've heard you talk about that in professional settings, but why is it also important to share the why when you're talking to your children? You have some
Yeah.
parents that will take the mindset of, don't ask me why, just do what I said, do it because I said so, or the answer to their why is because I said so,
Yeah.
and I'm like,
Yeah.
that's not helpful. Why would it be important to answer the why for your kids?
That's good. I want to talk just really quickly about your story and kind of jump back to that for a second.
Hmm.
I think, not I think, I know that it's also important, we make mistakes, we're all human and we're not perfect. And by no means am I on this platform to say that I parent perfectly. I don't. I make mistakes. I crash out and lose my cool. And so it's important what you do in the moment, but it's also as more important as what you do after the moment. Because
Hmm.
when you do crash out, and you will, because kids be doing the kiddiest things, people do the peopleest things.
Hmm.
Being able to come back and show humility and operate in humbleness and for asking for forgiveness and
Hmm.
repentance, that also models humanness for the other individual, whether it's a grown child, a grandchild, a young child, so that they can see that, oh, I'm gonna make mistakes, but I can
Hmm.
also apologize. You're creating an environment to know that they're going to make mistakes, but they can apologize, and you're not going to lose your cool when they do make those mistakes, or you might, and then you just apologize, and they realize that, oh, that's what can happen.
Yeah.
But then going to your question about the why, one of the biggest things, and this became more of a reality. I was doing it in parenting, but didn't know I was doing it. But I did a lot of parenting too young, saying because I said so, because that's what my mom told me, and that's what
Hmm.
parents like. You do as I say, not as I do, and that didn't always sit with me. I'm like, wait, that don't make sense. Like, but it was during the pandemic. I was principaling during the pandemic, and you now have a vision of people's inside their home, their living situations, all of the things. And I remember saying something to a student, I don't remember exactly, but whatever was said, I realized that his vantage point and my vantage point were very different. And
Mm.
I was like, what I felt like made perfect sense did not make sense to him because he had a different vantage point. So I started processing that and thinking, and made it just as plain as day. If I'm looking outside and I'm seeing yellow leaves, and I tell someone a yellow leaf, and they're like, what? And they're confused. And because they may see an orange leaf, and now our communication is misaligned and it's off, and we're frustrated because we're not connecting the dots, because what I see, you're not communicating, and I'm confused. Like, why don't you see what I see? Are you not smart? Those types of things. Or I'm attacking the character, not realizing there's something else underneath, and then asking better questions of, what do you see? Do you understand those types of things? And realizing, oh, you see orange, not yellow. I need to
Mhm.
shift the way that I'm communicating. That made me understand that it is important to communicate why behind it, because people don't. And when I say that, it's, I'm the only person that has seen out of my eyes. And so when
Mhm.
things that look clear to me, it's because it's coming from me seeing it. But just because I feel like it's clear may not be clear to the other person. So allowing people to ask a why, and again, it's that ego not being defensive, understanding that that why is really them asking, can I borrow your lens for a second? And for children, they have not lived long enough to have better verbiage to ask a why, so they just ask why. And
Mhm.
then when you're defensive, you feel like they're questioning your judgment, or they're questioning your leadership. And we have to sometimes we have to sit back and think, like, we got 2, 3 year olds, 5 year olds, 7 year olds, even my 11 year old. 11 years is not a long time to be on this earth. And so when she's
True.
asking why, you have to think like, oh, you know what? You've not experienced that, or you may be asking a different question, but you don't have the language for that. So sometimes when my daughter asks me questions, I probe her and say, what is it that you really want to know? Like, tell me more
Mhm.
so that I can get a better understanding. Because one thing I don't like when someone tries to dictate my time, especially children. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
What are we doing this? But I realize that that's a me trigger. And she's not trying to say we're doing this. She's trying to process her day so she can
Mhm.
prepare herself. So when she's asking me those types of questions, I have to ask her, what is it that you have going on? What are you trying to do?
Mhm.
And then she tells me, and I go, okay. And that helps to regulate, but it's a conversation. Sometimes we interact with children with just a matter of fact and move on. Like, they're people before they're
Mhm.
anything else. I tell
Mhm.
my students, you are a person before you are a student, before you're a child, before you're a friend. And so I want to treat you like that, but I ask that you treat me the same.
Yeah. When kids ask why, they're learning how to make those decisions for themselves. And if you just
Exactly.
say, because I said so, they don't ever learn how to think through their own
Yep.
problem solving. They're developing their problem solving skills.
Yep.
And so if you don't teach them how to think through it, if it's only because you said so, when you're not around, how do they make those decisions on their
How
own?
do they make them? And then you get
Yeah.
mad because you're like, why aren't you making this decision? And you're like, you've not given them the leadership tools because again,
Yep.
your home is your organization, but
Yeah.
also you're also building vocabulary. Think about it. If a child says why and you say because I said so, they learned 4 words. But if a
Yes.
child says why and you ask questions like, what are you trying to process? What are you trying to process? That's 6 words.
Hmm.
They're
Hmm.
giving you dialogue, you're giving them dialogue. Now you're building their vocabulary. And you're
Yeah.
also modeling what they do when other people are questioning them. Because when you say, because I said so, now when someone asks them a question, they're going to shut them down.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And
Even you, they're going to shut you down too.
yeah, yeah, 100%. And that's the thing with with making sure that we are teaching our kids the things that we did wrong as well as the things that we did right.
Right,
So
right.
when you were talking about, like, you have to go back and apologize and ask for forgiveness, that to me was so important in every aspect, because I was like, I don't want my kids repeating these behaviors. I was 18 when I had my son. I was 19 when I had my daughter. And I'm a very different person now at 50.
Hmm.
But the things that I've learned, I don't want them repeating, because I hear so many times people will say things like, well, my parents did this with me and I turned out all right. And I'm like,
Did
you
you though?
obviously
You're like,
don't
did
see what
you?
I see. Yeah, because you
Did you
obviously
turn out
don't
all
see
right?
what I see. So you did not turn out. I can
Who
vouch
is
for the fact that
measuring
you did
all
not.
right? Where'd you get this data?
Yeah, let's define what turned out all right
Define all
means.
right.
And so I'm like, I don't want my kids repeating. And I was very explicit with them about that. I said, you know what? This is an area that I've changed my mind about. And I don't believe in whipping kids anymore. And so, because I'm like, most times you just really need to teach them.
Yeah.
And so, and if they what I learned as a teacher is, when kids are defiant, it's because there's a problem in the relationship.
Hmm.
So we have to, as leaders, figure out how we can lead in a different way that's going to push our kids to do what we want them to do, because we cannot control anybody, you
Right.
know? So even if you beat them, you can't control them. They can either choose to do or not do what you're asking them to do. So as much as I've learned and developed and grown, I always share that with my kids, because they're grown. And I tell them, I don't want you repeating this behavior with your kids. Um, but for those parents that might have some hesitancy about admitting they were wrong on something, what advice can you give to those parents who may have a
Yeah,
problem just admitting or apologizing to their kids?
that's good. That's good stuff. I think that that's a perfect lead way into what some may now look at this even podcast and say like, oh, there goes those gentle parenting people, or how are you going to tell me how to raise my kids, or all the things. I want to make sure that this is clippable and heard. Um, by no means am I telling you how to raise your kids, and by no means am I saying don't be a parent, because children do need discipline, and it's discipline, not punishment. That's the biggest thing for me. It's discipline, because discipline creates a level of discipleship, which means it creates a change in behavior. Punishment creates fear. People will then react out of fear, but the moment they're out of your sight, they're going to do whatever it is that they chose and want to do. But when they're disciplined, that creates some discipline, that they will have a level of integrity and behave with the morals. That's why, again, I said it's important to create some core values, some morals, some mission, the vision. They will behave then that way outside of your presence, because you've created some discipline. So that's one.
Yep.
Two, I don't believe in what society has called gentle parenting. Gentle parenting, I think, has gotten to be a buzzword, and it has gotten to be misaligned with what it really is supposed to be. And so people assume gentle parenting is gentle talking and passivity, where you're like, oh, honey, sweetie, don't do. No, gentle parenting is having a level of empathy and understanding and developing communication for a longevity of relationship. And you still have sternness. And so, what I always like to say is, when I say leverage and love, that's modeling after Jesus. Like Jesus flipped tables, like, and he was stern in what he had to say. So it wasn't like, oh, don't do this. And so when you're talking to your children and you're thinking about them having to do something that is necessary. For instance, like if we're at the playground and it's time to go, and you're not like, honey, well, whenever you feel like it, that's not gentle. That's passivity, and that's letting your kids run over you. It's this is what we're about to do. I'm going to need you to pack your things up. Let me know that you've heard me. Now you have these many seconds to let's go, or I'm going to come and get your things and move you. So now you're giving them the ability to make a wise decision. And when they don't, then you have to take authority as the parent. And then you can have a
Mhm.
conversation about that later, because that's what the gentleness is building relationship through conversation, championing that conflict so that your children learn through everyday interactions. And those interactions start with you, their leader, their boss, their supervisor, all of those things. So when they get to be in the real world. And so for those parents who are saying, I kind of missed the question. I think I answered it, but the one question is, what would we say to parents who are, give me that last part again.
Oh, who are struggling with the idea of
Well,
uh,
apologizing after.
apologizing and asking for forgiveness. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Again, just like kids, there's an underlying behavior, there's an underlying thing that attributes or contributes to their behavior. The same with parents. There's an underlying thing that contributes to why you can't apologize to kids. And those things may be you have to identify those things. Those things can be you because you were treated as a child to be inferior and less than a person. And not saying like your parents didn't value you as a person, but when you don't give someone the agency to be able to speak up for themselves, if that's how you were raised, then you have developed a generational thing that is continuing. And so if this sparks a nerve and you're like, apologizing, I'm not going to be apologizing to no kids, then I would say if you want to build relationship, then you need to investigate maybe some coaching or some therapy that helps to talk through those things. Shameless plug, I do provide coaching in that area. But be able to push past that to see, okay, what are some things that I need to uncover that is creating a barrier for me to see my child as a person, whereby apology. Then also look at some data. Is your child struggling to apologize to you? Is your child
Mm.
displaying behaviors of being dishonest? Those are all other indicators that the environment is not conducive to development and growth and creating relationship and legacy. And that could all go back to, are you showing up in humility after? Because again, we're not saying you ain't gonna lash out. We're not saying you're not gonna get upset. We're not saying you're not gonna fly off with some film and flam words, because those things happen. But what we're saying is, what do we do after? And
Yeah.
also, would you apologize to a friend or a boss or someone if you slighted them? And if you
Mm.
don't do it there, then we got some more issues to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's huge because you would want your boss to apologize to you if they had done something wrong or offensive towards you, even though they're the person in command or in lead, right? And so you, as the leader of your household, should also do the
Hmm.
same thing with your children. Just because that person is above you, you
Yeah,
don't think that that exempts them from apologizing. So similar relationship with you and your children. But I would love for you to share what it is that you do with your coaching so that folks who may be interested in learning more or how to become a better parent in that way or even leader, can you tell what it is that you do with your coaching?
definitely. If it's okay with you, I want to kind of talk just about that for again a second, because you brought up a great point with you would want your boss to. And I think that leads back into even answering that question even more. If you put yourself in some in that your child's shoes. That's what that empathy is. When we think about our children being people, one of the a signifying moment for me, I was in an environment in an organization where my boss was a bully. And
Mm,
she would yell and belittle me and like just yell like and I didn't realize it was wrong until I said it to somebody. Well, I realized it was wrong, but it didn't strike me as being all the way wrong because that was just her demeanor, that she was always doing it, so it became the norm, if you will, in a toxic relationship. And I said it to somebody. I was like, and she yelled at me, and that person said, she yelled at you, and I was like, that's wrong, ain't it? And she was like, absolutely. But in that season of time, I had yelled at my daughter in a way that I had never
mm,
done it, and it mimicked that same behavior, like at the top of my lungs. And I sat back, and the way my daughter looked at me when I did it, I saw myself in the moment when my boss yelled at me the way she did. And I remembered how I felt, how
wow.
the tears were welling up, and how little, how devalued I felt. And I looked at my daughter and I was like, oh my God, I would never want you to feel that way. I definitely don't want to be the person to make you feel the way that that person made me feel. And so that, when we think about like how you put yourself in those shoes, have you ever experienced? So when you think going back to your childhood, this was something that was generational, where as a child you weren't apologized to. Think back, take yourself back to the 11-year-old, the 5-year-old, the 7-year-old,
Yeah.
and say, how did I feel? Do I want my child to feel that same way? That alone should be enough to say, I got to do something different. And
Yeah.
so, what I do in my organization is when I talk about building environments that people don't quit, that environment starts internally. And so, I focus on transforming mindsets where we are becoming more understanding, becoming more aware of ourselves so that we can understand others. And then we are leveraging love in our leadership. We're looking at things like, how are people feeling after they encountered us? Do they feel loved? Or do they feel less than? And so being
Mm,
able to model our actions in leadership after that, because that's not passive, that is stewarding good relationships. That is stewarding the relationships that have been put in front of you for you to lead in. And then we start looking at championing conflict, because conflict is inevitable. It's going to be there. But if we dismiss it or we avoid it, then we start to develop and build habits that become less than, that mimic behaviors like, I'm not apologizing, I'm going to run away from this, I'm going to put myself now in survival mode constantly. And when you're in survival mode, then you react, you find things to be wrong, you find ways to say that you've been wrong, you start to develop your behavior and your interactions based on perceptions and not reality, because you haven't taken the time to look at that. And then you start calling everything a red flag. And everything's not
mm,
a red flag. Some things are data that just needs to be dove into to say, let's uncover this a little bit more. But you don't start quitting and running away, because now you're looking at, okay, well, how can we understand this to be better data so that we can create longevity and legacy in our relationships? And so, again, I do that with individuals on coaching basis. I do that with organizations, with their leaders, with parents, and I do have a stay lab that's starting the end of December, and that staying power lab, and that lab is working through a lot of these transforming mindsets and leveraging love, different focuses that we're looking at, like reconciliation, creating a memorandum of reconciliation. What does that look like after you've done a thing? Like, how do you, after a contract or a breach has happened in a relationship, how do you do some reconciliation with that? What does those things look like? How do you create a safe space within yourself? And so that coaching and teaching is biblical principles aligned with your life and every day. And so, yeah, those are the things that
oh,
I do.
I love that so much because that reconciliation is the key. You know, even when things have been broken, you got to bring them back together. And especially when we're talking about parents and their kids, you know, you
Yeah.
have to come somehow fix it. And I love that you said we're not talking about that you don't agree with gentle parenting, because I don't even fully understand what that looks like. You know, all I've seen is tantrums in public.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, that does not work. And
Yeah.
what I'm definitely not going to do is reinforce that by giving you what it is that you want,
Right.
you know. And so I just, when I analyzed how I was as a parent, I whooped my kids, and And my son has talked to me about recently and was like, when y'all used to whoop us, and I was like, I don't feel like it was that many whoopings, but he's 31 and still talking about the whoopings. And so but I feel like it was the easy way out,
Mhm.
because you feel like the discipline has been done and you don't have to do anything else. I always felt like it was harder to give a punishment because I felt like I was punishing myself at the same time. If I tell you can't watch TV, now we got to talk. Like, we got to interact, or we're gonna read books together. But now it's requiring me to do something versus I can just whoop you and then you can go on with your day. You can go back to watching TV. You can go back to whatever, and I didn't have to sit and police whatever I was expecting, and I didn't want that responsibility. I just didn't want that. And another thing that I did, because me and my kids' dad were co-parenting, there were times when my kids misbehaved at my house, and I'm like, you can go to your dad's house, and I wish I hadn't done that, because that's giving away that power, giving away. It's not building the relationship. And it's also just not
Yeah.
teaching kids what to do and why to do it. And so
Right.
I wish I had spent more time talking with them, which is what I do now, and is what I do with my grandkids. And my grandson, my oldest one, is 6. And I mean, he's busy. And so sometimes you got to just stop him. Sincere, stop, listen to
Mhm.
me, do this. And because his little mind is racing like this, I can't just tell him, I can't just yell, hey, Sincere, come get your shoes out the living room, and then expect that he heard me and processed what I asked him to do. Sincere, come
Right.
here, grab these shoes, go put them in the closet. And he'll stop what he's doing and go do it. But it takes more time to do that than to just
Yeah.
yell or to just spank and just go on with your day. Um, but I really appreciate you for taking the time. Um, if you were, what is one thing that you wish you had known before becoming a parent, or one thing that you wish you had done differently as a parent? Either one of those questions.
Oh, yeah, that's good stuff right there. Going back to what you said though, like taking the time, um, recognizing again that you are building an organization. Whether you feel like you're a leader or not, you have been thrown into entrepreneurship as a parent because you are building
Wow.
that organization without a playbook, without a guideline. To have a specificity of what your organization looks like, you have to develop that. And you have to develop that based on things that you went through that you don't want your children to go through, based on your reality and your truth of your experience and how you want to shift that narrative or not. Even what you said about like spanking, it is sometimes it is a cop out, like, and I'm not by all means telling you how to discipline your child, excuse me. But when you say things like, I can do that and get and then be done with it because I don't have to interact, that's a form of quitting. Or I can send them
Mhm.
to a grandparent or send them to their dad.
Mhm.
That's a form of quitting because it's like, I'm gonna let somebody else deal with it. Now that space that they're sent to looks like a punishment, like
Yep.
they're sent to their dad, so that's a punishment. And so that is a form of quitting. But when we think about our organizations and we think about our business and we think about our money that's tied to what we have to do in life, we don't say things like, I don't want to have to engage with this. We figure that out. And so when
True.
we look at our children as part of being part of our organization that is longstanding, because again, whether you are a true entrepreneur in a business where you are building a business or you are working in an organization, the moment you're not there, life will still go on. But when we think about
Mhm.
our children, when we're no longer here, yes, life goes on, but we want them to go on with our children being us being a thought in our children's mind or being a staple. A friend of mine would always say, she had this shirt after her mom passed that says, Mama used to say, and her siblings had all of these phrases, and she was older than me, well, she is older than me, and so I was a young parent at the time, and they had all of these phrases on the front, the back, the arm, all the stuff. And I just remember at the time my kids were probably 4 and 1, because they're my older ones are 3 years apart. And I was just like, oh my God, I want to be that type of parent where my kids can say long before I'm gone that mama used to say, or you do this. And so when my kids do say things to me like, I know you or something like that, I'm like, ooh, I feel like I've accomplished something because I'm able to leave you with something that helps you along the way in life. And so some things, again, that I wish I would have known is it's a business. This is an organization that you're building as a parent, and we need to identify it as such. And what I would have done differently, was that your next question? I'm sorry.
Hmm. Yeah, it could have been one or the other or both.
Okay, so what I
Yeah.
would have, what I now get the chance to do differently, now that I have a younger one, and I have two adult children who are my partners, in parenting, because I can bounce some things off of them, is I think what I do differently now is taking the time to really be intentional with my why and having that communication behind it. Being a younger parent with my older ones, I didn't realize that I was kind of just doing the thing. I parented a lot different than my parents, but still had some of those because I said so moments. But then I had a lot of the moments where I had conversations and people would say things like, "Your kids are so, I don't want my kids to be that smart. You talk to them a lot," you know?
Wow.
And so for that, I continue that, but I'm more intentional with like, let me hear your feedback. And so also that what I've done differently is bringing my child into being a leader in our organization as well, because this is part of her legacy that she's also going to build.
I love that. I love that. Um, I was gonna ask you, do your older kids say you weren't like that with the younger kids, or you weren't like that with me when it comes to your grandkids?
They they don't, only because of how I parented them. Now I say that to my mother, and my I say, I'd be like, my stepmother, my mother, I'll be like, I'm sorry, because my mother would be counting to one and a quarter, one and 56 sevenths. I'm like, wait a minute, three. What is happening right now? But my kids are more so of like, Mom, when you did that with us, like, and so they're more, have more agency of telling me how to be softer and how to be gentler, how to be more intentional. And with my mom, I'm trying to teach her the same thing with her grandkids who are, my brother is young enough to be my son. And so my mother's grandkids, my brother's kids are my kids' age, my daughter's age, or younger, whatever. So, anywho, I'm
Hmm.
able to kind of give that, like my brother's my daughter's age, I should say that.
Hmm.
And so I'm able to teach my mom there. But then sometimes when she gets a little too soft, I'm like, hey, wrap this up. One, two, three. We're
Yeah.
not gonna be counting 800. Like, come over here. Listen to what we're gonna say.
Hmm. Hmm. Because my daughter will be like, "You didn't do that with us." I'm like, "Listen, I learned to be better. I don't want to make the same mistakes over and over again."
Yeah.
And so that was just a part of that. But it's so interesting that you see that with your mom, um, and with your younger siblings. But we all learn and we grow and we become. But people say when people get older, they get softer. And I don't think it's just
They
that when we
do,
get
yeah.
older, we get softer. I think it's
We get
more we
wiser.
learn, yeah, we learn to do things differently, and we learn to
Yeah.
negotiate. We don't have to yell and scream and beat kids to get them to do what they want to do. um can Where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn. I am my name, Dr. Tawana L. Wiggins on LinkedIn. That's where most of my content and contact reach and information is there. My website is bit.ly/TL collaborative. And you can find me on my website. But if you reach me on LinkedIn, you'll find everything you need to know there.
LinkedIn, I love it. Yeah, I saw a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. I was like, oh, this is good content. You put out some really good stuff that people can
Thank you.
learn from, and it shows the work that you do, so that when
Yeah,
folks are looking for someone to coach them and help them, I love that they have someone that they can go to. It was important to me to start the Don't Screw Up Your Kids podcast because so many times I hear people say, I don't need somebody to teach me how to raise my kids. And I said that when I was a teen mom, but then when I took some child development classes and some educational psychology classes, I was like, wow, I wish I had known this when I was young, when my kids were younger. They were in high school when I was
right.
taking these classes. And I was like, if I had learned these things, they could have had a better childhood. And that's how I am a different person now, because I learned so much. And so I've heard you say a few times, like, we're not telling you how to raise your kids. And I definitely don't. want that. But I want people to be able to learn something that they can take and say, you know what, I can try this out with my children if it's going to help my
Yeah.
kids be better. And I think that if we can share, my goal in creating this is to share all the mistakes I made as a parent and all the things that I learned as an educator, and to bring in experts like yourself who can share other perspectives on how to be the best parent we
Exactly.
can be. And so if we can learn from other people's mistakes as well as learn from other people's successes, we can create the best childhood for our kids. And I'm hoping that that's what we're able to do.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for coming on. Any last words that you would like to say before we end?
Yeah. I would challenge you if you are one that's saying, I don't need somebody to tell me how to raise my kids or teach me. Let me say, not tell me, but teach me how to raise my kids. I would challenge you to investigate that because when you go into something new, a business or whatever, you need to be taught. And so even if you've had one, two, three, a couple children, I would say every year I was a new mom. I never parented an adult child in the millennium. I'm a new mom with this 11-year-old because I never parented an alpha generation with adult children, all of the things. And so
Mhm.
I would challenge you to really humble yourself and think about like, why do you feel like you don't need to be taught the thing that you've never done, even if you already have other children, because every child is different. And so when you say you need to be taught things in life aside from parenting, I would challenge you to think about that and sit with that for a moment and why you think that you don't need to be taught to do a new thing, and kind of understand where that thought process is coming from. And then again, just lastly, it's an organization. And so you've never ran this organization this way before. And so step into thinking it with that way of how would you run an organization? How would you operate in a new job role and position and pull those same tactics, techniques, mindsets, tools into the organization of your family?
Whew, that is so big. And I will take that with me forever. That this is an organization, because when I think about different jobs that I've had, even as employees change, even as they learn new skills, the organization is constantly changing. Your family organization is constantly changing. And so thank you so much for that. I appreciate you. I appreciate all that you've shared. If you are watching this and you found value, please share, please like, please subscribe, and please get with Dr. Tawana Wiggins if you want to make sure that your family organization is together the way it should be. This is another episode of the Don't Screw Up Your Kids podcast. And again, I'm Kaleesha
Yes,
Washington.
absolutely.
I'm your parenting BFF. I help parents plan with purpose so we can raise kids who are happy, healthy, and whole. Have a good day.